In Genesis 1, we read that the God of a billion galaxies decided to assign all of his image bearers the divine purpose of ruling and reigning over all of creation as his representatives. This was a mind-blowing idea for the first readers who had not seen themselves as the image bearers of God or as representatives, because that purpose was reserved for the kings and queens of the day. This truth then about their God-given purpose, their big why of life, changed everything. But what did it look like for them to live it out? What were they to do to fulfill this purpose? Well, let's go back to the garden story. In Genesis 2:5, we're told that something was missing in this world. There was no water, no trees, and no one to take care of these resources and cultivate them. So God creates the raw materials, and then in verse 15, the Adam, or human, God's representative, is placed in the garden and given the specific task to cultivate and care for this corner of the land in the region of Eden. Surprisingly, this is when God stops creating. He rests, meanwhile giving his humans a blank slate. They have access to all these raw materials of creation and are left to go do something with it. So there's water, but there's no irrigation channels. There's gold in the hills, we're told, but no tools to extract it. Trees, but no homes. Sun, but no means to store its energy. Language, but no poetry or song. Think about it. God's image bearers found themselves in the world as it was meant to be, but not as it was meant to remain. They were to build, create, cultivate. This was their God-given mandate. So, what was humanity created to do? They were to work. Work is humanity's divine, sacred, and holy task as God's children representing him in the world. Tim Keller describes our task as rearranging the raw material of God's creation in such a way that it helps the world thrive and flourish. In other words, it's following the pattern set out by our Creator and fashioning the good world that God intended. We can only imagine what this might have meant for those first humans in the garden, naming the animals and cultivating the soil, planting fruit trees. They were to uncover and steward the natural resources hidden in the ground. They were to build society and families and much more. So, how is your work cultivating God's world? Are you a teacher taking ideas, concepts, and information and cultivating lessons that shape minds? Are you a farmer taking grain, seed, and fertilizer to sow a crop and feeding a society? Or are you an artist using paint and fabric or music to beautify and uplift hearts? Look at your life. As you organize, quantify, engineer, facilitate, raise children, can your work reveal a small part of God's kingdom to a world so desperately in need of it? It can. It was God's plan from the very beginning to image your Creator and the world as it was meant to be in the everyday moments and everyday spheres of your daily life. This is what God created you to do.